Hi, I'm Alara. I'm 28 years old, and my story starts where my life should have just begun. My twin sister Chloe and I were inseparable, not just physically, which is inevitable for twins, but in purpose. We were competitive, yes, but we pushed each other through the most grueling academic years imaginable. We achieved the same impossible dream, acceptance into one of the country's elite medical schools. And then 5 years later, we achieved the next impossibility, graduation. We walked that stage together, in the heavy, ridiculous academic regalia that felt less like a robe of honor and more like a straitjacket of debt. The weight was real, the sheer, suffocating volume of it. We both owed the same monstrous, life-crippling figure, $300,000. It's the kind of number that doesn't just affect your finances, it affects your entire psychological landscape. It steals sleep, it shortens your temper, it dictates your future. It's a chain forged of paper and interest rates, and we both had it wrapped around our throats. We had faced every challenge of medical school as a united front, and I fully expected us to face this financial mountain together too. We'd commiserate, we'd budget, we'd tackle the beast side by side. That expectation lasted exactly 7 days. The setting was a dinner meant to be a joint celebration, held in the private dining room of a restaurant my parents could only afford because they were planning a grand gesture. I should have known. When we sat down, they placed Chloe at Dad's right hand, and me, well, I was at the far corner. I had already begun to feel the familiar, sickening shift in the room's energy, that quiet, almost imperceptible tilt of attention and affection toward Chloe. Dad stood, champagne glass raised, the crystal sparkling under the soft lights. He started with the obligatory toast to the doctors, a ritual I was already tired of. But then he locked eyes with Chloe, and only Chloe. Chloe, your mother and I are so proud of you. We know the pressure you'll face starting your cosmetic dermatology practice. We want you to focus purely on your career. So, tonight, we eliminate the pressure. He pushed a beautifully bound folder across the mahogany table. It wasn't a card. It wasn't a bond. It was a formal, stamped document confirming the complete and total liquidation of her student loan balance. $300,000. Gone. Wiped clean. Her sentence abolished in one swift, financially violent action. The sound Chloe made was a mixture of a gasp and a sob of pure, unadulterated relief. She vaulted out of her seat, weeping hysterically, throwing herself into their arms, and I sat there, paralyzed. I was staring at the empty space on the table in front of me, the space where my folder should have been, the space where my liberation should have been placed. My own student loan statement, a stack of merciless white paper, felt suddenly heavier than lead-in, the imagined space before me. I tried to speak. The sound that came out was a high-pitched, pathetic croak. What? What about me? The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard. My mother, still hugging Chloe, pulled back just enough to look at me not with compassion, not even with awkwardness, but with a weary impatience, as if I had just interrupted a church service. She delivered the line that has since become the defining wound of my young adult life, the phrase that I replay in my head every time I see a loan statement or miss a social event because of work. She smiled, a soft, sickeningly patronizing smile, and said, "She deserves it more, honey. She deserves it more, honey." The words weren't yelled. They were murmured, which somehow made them infinitely colder, infinitely more cruel. It was a calculated, dismissive judgment. In that moment, they didn't just deny me money. They denied my worth. They invalidated 5 years of my life, my sacrifice, my hard work. We did the same thing, but only one of us was deemed worthy of the reward. When I demanded an explanation, my father, now composed, offered a rationalization that was equally insulting. "Ilara, you chose pediatrics. It's a noble field, but you know it's not lucrative. Chloe is going into cosmetic surgery. She has a much higher potential earning curve. This is an investment. We need to support her in the area where she can best succeed. An investment." I was no longer their child. I was a stock whose potential earnings were deemed too low to justify the risk. My choice to help sick children, my nobility, was the precise reason I was condemned to financial servitude. Their love was conditional on my potential ROI. That night, the shock eventually gave way to a cold, crystalline fury. I didn't cry. Crying was for victims, and I refused to be one. I gathered my things, nodded stiffly, and walked out of that expensive room, leaving them to their sickening celebration of financial bias. The $300,000 burden I still carried felt different now. It was no longer just debt, it was the physical manifestation of my parents' betrayal. And I swore that they would pay a price for that betrayal that no amount of money could cover. I understand. You want me to restart the entire script from chapter 1, ensuring it adheres to the requested length and structure of 13 chapters of approximately 1,000 words each, and maintaining the sole voice of the angry and painful narrator, Ilara. Here's the start of the full, extended 13-chapter script. Chapter 1. The shared finish line and the solo sentence approx. 1,000 words. Hi, I'm Ilara. I'm 28 years old, and my story starts where my life should have just begun. My twin sister Chloe and I were inseparable. Not just physically, which is inevitable for twins, but in purpose. We were competitive, yes, but we pushed each other through the most grueling academic years imaginable. We achieved the same impossible dream: acceptance into one of the country's elite medical schools. And then, 5 years later, we achieved the next impossibility: graduation. We walked that stage together, in the heavy, ridiculous academic regalia that felt less like a robe of honor and more like a straitjacket of debt. The weight was real, the sheer, suffocating volume of it. We both owed the same monstrous, life-crippling figure: $300,000. It's the kind of number that doesn't just affect your finances, it affects your entire psychological landscape. It steals sleep, it shortens your temper, it dictates your future. It's a chain forged of paper and interest rates, and we both had it wrapped around our throats. We had faced every challenge of medical school as a united front, and I fully expected us to face this financial mountain together too. We'd commiserate, we'd budget, we'd tackle the beast side by side. That expectation lasted exactly 7 days. The setting was a dinner meant to be a joint celebration, held in the private dining room of a restaurant my parents could only afford because they were planning a grand gesture. I should have known. When we sat down, they placed Chloe at Dad's right hand, and me, well, I was at the far corner. I had already begun to feel the familiar, sickening shift in the room's energy, that quiet, almost imperceptible tilt of attention and affection toward Chloe. Dad stood, champagne glass raised, the crystal sparkling under the soft lights. He started with the obligatory toast to the doctors, a ritual I was already tired of, but then he locked eyes with Chloe, and only Chloe. Chloe, your mother and I are so proud of you. We know the pressure you'll face starting your cosmetic dermatology practice. We want you to focus purely on your career. So, tonight, we eliminate the pressure. He pushed a beautifully bound folder across the mahogany table. It wasn't a card, it wasn't a bond, it was a formal, stamped document confirming the complete and total liquidation of her student loan balance. $300,000. Gone. Wiped clean. Her sentence abolished in one swift, financially violent action. The sound Chloe made was a mixture of a gasp and a sob of pure, unadulterated relief. She vaulted out of her seat, weeping hysterically, throwing herself into their arms. And I sat there, paralyzed. I was staring at the empty space on the table in front of me, the space where my folder should have been, the space where my liberation should have been placed. My own student loan statement, a stack of merciless white paper, felt suddenly heavier than lead in the imagined space before me. I tried to speak. The sound that came out was a high-pitched, pathetic croak. What about me? The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard. My mother, still hugging Chloe, pulled back just enough to look at me, not with compassion, not even with awkwardness, but with a weary impatience, as if I had just interrupted a church service. She delivered the line that has since become the defining wound of my young adult life, the phrase that I replay in my head every time I see a loan statement or miss a social event because of work. She smiled, a soft, sickeningly patronizing smile, and said, "She deserves it more, honey. She deserves it more, honey." The words weren't yelled, they were murmured, which somehow made them infinitely colder, infinitely more cruel. It was a calculated, dismissive judgment. In that moment, they didn't just deny me money, they denied my worth. They invalidated 5 years of my life, my sacrifice, my hard work. We did the same thing, but only one of us was deemed worthy of the reward. When I demanded an explanation, my father, now composed, offered a rationalization that was equally insulting. "Ilara, you chose pediatrics. It's a noble field, but you know it's not lucrative. Chloe is going into cosmetic surgery. She has a much higher potential earning curve. This is an investment. We need to support her in the area where she can best succeed. An investment." I was no longer their child. I was a stock whose potential earnings were deemed too low to justify the risk. My choice to help sick children, my nobility, was the precise reason I was condemned to financial servitude. Their love was conditional on my potential ROI. That night, the shock eventually gave way to a cold, crystalline fury. I didn't cry. Crying was for victims, and I refused to be one. I gathered my things, nodded stiffly, and walked out of that expensive room, leaving them to their sickening celebration of financial bias. The $300,000 burden I still carried felt different now. It was no longer just debt. It was the physical manifestation of my parents' betrayal, and I swore that they would pay a price for that betrayal that no amount of money could cover. Chapter 2. The weight of 300,000. Approx. 1,000 words. The months following the dinner were a descent into financial and emotional hell. While Chloe was apartment hunting in the sleek, expensive high-rises downtown, while she was posting pictures of new designer bags and telling me how stress-free her life was, I was meticulously tracking every single dollar. $300,000 isn't a single debt. It's 1,000 tiny humiliations, a constant nagging fear. My life became a brutal series of sacrifices. I moved into a cramped, noisy apartment with 2 other residents, sharing kitchen duty and fighting over the single bathroom. My diet consisted of hospital cafeteria food and cheap instant meals. I sold the few nice things I owned, a vintage camera, some inherited jewelry, just to create a small buffer. Every time I looked at my monthly statement, I saw the minimum payment and my stomach would clench. The interest alone was astronomical, a hungry, parasitic beast that devoured my paycheck. I was working 60, 70, sometimes 80 hours a week in my residency, caring for sick children, and yet the principal of my loan barely moved. It felt like running on a treadmill that was speeding up every time I tried to catch my breath. And the hardest part wasn't the material sacrifice. It was the psychological torment of the comparison. Chloe would call, not to connect, but to flaunt. "Oh, Ilara, you should really come visit my new loft. It has floor-to-ceiling windows. But you know, I guess you can't afford the gas right now, can you?" Her voice would be laced with that saccharine false sympathy, the kind that masks utter contempt. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew she was dancing on my financial grave, and she loved the performance. I tried, desperately, to appeal to my parents one more time. I compiled a professional, meticulously documented spreadsheet showing my exact budget, my high interest rates, and the mathematical impossibility of my current situation. I walked into their house, armed with data and a plea for help. My father barely glanced at the papers. He dismissed the entire file with a wave of his hand. "You need to learn financial responsibility, Ilara," he droned, looking utterly bored. "You're a doctor. If you can't manage this, that's your fault, not ours. You chose the high-debt path. You handle the outcome. Stop being so dramatic." Stop being so dramatic. That phrase was a dagger. They didn't see me struggling. They saw me failing. They refused to acknowledge that their single act of favoritism had created this impossible scenario. Their justification was always the same. They knew best. They saw me as weak, incapable, and undeserving of their help, while Chloe was strong, smart, and a guaranteed success story. They had built a narrative of my incompetence to justify their own cold-heartedness, and they were sticking to it. The pressure began to erode my professional competence. I developed chronic, severe insomnia. My hands would shake during delicate procedures. I was constantly distracted, haunted by the specter of debt. I was terrified of making a mistake, of having my license threatened, which would truly condemn me. I began to realize that their neglect wasn't just unfair, it was potentially career-ending. They were putting their low-yield investment at risk without a second thought, solely to cushion their high-yield daughter. It was during one particularly bleak night shift, staring at the sterile white walls, that I made a decision. I realized that begging was useless. Appealing to their love was futile. My only remaining currency was my rage and my meticulous, analytical mind. I stopped trying to pay down the principal aggressively and started diverting a small, but significant, portion of my earnings into a secret slush fund. It wasn't for debt, it was for defense. It was for the war chest I would need to fight back. I channeled all the humiliation, all the exhaustion, and all the white-hot resentment into one singular goal, proving them wrong. I was not going to break. I was going to use their betrayal to rebuild myself, and then I was going to make them witness the consequences of their choice. The invitation arrived precisely 3 months into my crippling struggle. It wasn't an email or a phone call. It was a thick, embossed cardstock envelope, hand-delivered by a courier. Inside was the formal announcement: Chloe's debt-free celebration. The title itself was a calculated act of aggression. It wasn't a graduation party. It was a party specifically to honor the absence of the financial burden I was actively choking under. It was a victory lap paid for by the people who had consciously decided to let me lose. Black tie, exclusive venue, champagne flowing. It was a monument to their unfairness. My first impulse was a violent urge to rip the card into a million tiny, satisfying pieces. My second impulse was to block their number, delete the group chat, and vanish into my residency, letting them tell everyone I was too busy and a bit moody. That would be the easy way out. It would be surrender. It would allow them to control the narrative entirely, casting me as the bitter, absent twin who couldn't handle her life. But I was done letting them control the narrative. I sat with the invitation in my hands, feeling the fine, expensive texture of the paper. I looked at Chloe's perfectly posed, smiling face on the small insert photo, and I saw not a sister, but an adversary, shielded by our parents' financial decisions. That's when the cold resolve solidified. I wasn't going to skip the party. I was going to attend as a guest of honor in the execution of my plan. I was going to turn their celebration into my stage. The first step was securing my intelligence. I immediately called Aunt Carol. Aunt Carol was the only person in the family who had ever seen through my parents' carefully curated image of perfection. She had been publicly ostracized years ago for daring to question one of Dad's shady business dealings. She understood the language of manipulation and financial secrecy. I laid out the entire story for her: the graduation, the debt payment for Chloe, the agonizing quote, "She deserves it more." Aunt Carol listened in silence, and when I finished, her voice was low and shaking with fury. She confirmed my worst fears. She said Mom and Dad were ruthless, and that they had been playing favorites with Chloe since we were teenagers, hiding financial gifts and opportunities from me. Then came the bombshell. Aunt Carol told me about a specific legal loophole my father had used several years ago, involving the early transfer of a prime piece of commercial property into a family trust. For the deal to work most advantageously, they had to ensure that the eventual beneficiary, Chloe, had zero external liabilities. The payment of Chloe's $300,000 debt wasn't a selfless gift of love. It was a cold, calculated move to facilitate a separate, multi-million-dollar tax dodge that benefited them and secured Chloe's financial future completely, while I was simply collateral damage, discarded because I complicated the paperwork. The debt payment wasn't a bonus. It was a transactional necessity for their own profit. The revelation was like a shot of adrenaline laced with pure venom. It wasn't just unfair. It was criminal in its intention. It confirmed that their love was a ledger, and I was marked as a loss. I immediately called a corporate litigation lawyer, not my old divorce attorney type friend, but a serious professional. I paid his exorbitant retainer fee from my secret slush fund, sacrificing another massive chunk of my savings. I handed him the paperwork Aunt Carol had given me, along with my sister's debt payment confirmation. I instructed him to research the implications. My goal wasn't just to expose the favoritism, but to expose the corruption and the inherent unfairness of the trust structure they had set up. I wanted to hit them where it truly hurt, their wealth and their reputation. I wanted their investment in Chloe to become their biggest liability. I accepted the invitation. My text back to Mom was curt: "I'll be there." My appearance would be the first chess move in a game they didn't know they were playing. The weeks leading up to the celebration were the most psychologically challenging of my life. I was still balancing the brutal demands of my pediatrics residency, the long hours, the heartbreaking cases, the constant fatigue with the meticulous, clandestine preparation for my revenge. I was essentially leading two parallel lives: the dedicated, exhausted resident, and the vengeful architect of a public takedown. The stress was immense. I was living on coffee and spite. The physical exhaustion was profound, but the emotional drain of maintaining the facade around my family was almost worse. Chloe was relentless. She would send group texts, detailing the menu, the guest list, the seating chart. She was practically vibrating with excitement. My parents, meanwhile, were sending me little patronizing gifts: a $50 gift card to a chain coffee shop, a cheap basket of lotions accompanied by notes saying, "Just thinking of our little doctor, working so hard." They were performing the role of loving parents to absolve their guilt, offering scraps while they feasted with Chloe. I tossed the gifts in the trash. I didn't want their pity. I wanted their justice. I had to buy the dress. It was a crucial part of the performance. I couldn't walk into that ballroom in anything that suggested struggle. I needed to look untouchable. I went to a high-end boutique and selected a gown of deep sapphire blue, tailored, elegant, and completely unforgiving. It cost over $1,000, money that should have gone toward my debt. Every fiber of my financial conscience screamed in protest, but the voice of revenge was louder. This wasn't clothing. It was a uniform. It was psychological armor. Putting on the dress for the first time was a moment of profound transformation. I looked in the mirror and didn't see Ilara, the struggling resident, weighed down by $300,000. I saw Dr. Ilara, the successful, polished professional who carried herself with a quiet, dangerous confidence. I practiced my smile, a fixed, pleasant expression that conveyed absolutely nothing. I practiced the tone of my voice, smooth, low, and utterly devoid of fear. I knew that my parents and Chloe would be looking for signs of bitterness, of jealousy, of financial strain. They needed to see me broken to confirm their decision was correct. I was determined to deny them that satisfaction. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, finalized the document. It wasn't a lawsuit, not yet. It was a formal, notarized statement detailing the timeline of Chloe's debt payment, the subsequent trust restructuring for the commercial property, and the specific clause that made the transaction legally dubious because of the unequal treatment of the two named beneficiaries, Chloe and myself, due to an old family contract. The document wasn't just an accusation, it was a threat, proof that I had armed myself with the full, devastating knowledge of their financial maneuvering. I memorized every clause, every date, every damning detail. The day of the party, I felt a strange combination of nauseating anxiety and thrilling focus. I spent hours perfecting my hair and makeup, every detail precise, every element communicating success. I was preparing for battle. I pinned the small, folded, notarized document, the key to the entire operation, into the hidden pocket of my clutch bag. It felt cold and heavy, a promissory note of my impending vengeance. When I finally looked in the mirror, the woman staring back wasn't their daughter. She was a meticulous, ice-cold professional, ready to execute a hostile takeover of their perfect night. I took a final, deep, steadying breath. I whispered to my reflection, the pain and the anger coalescing into a sharp resolve. They left you to drown, Ilara. Now, they are going to watch you walk on water. I grabbed my clutch and stepped out of my tiny, debt-ridden apartment and into the night, ready to face the music. The venue was everything I had expected. Ostentatious, expensive, and draped in the suffocating arrogance of the newly rich. Crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements of imported orchids, a string quartet playing soft classical music. It smelled like wealth and the desperation to be seen as wealthy. Every guest was dressed in designer clothing, shimmering like expensive bait. I walked in alone, pausing at the threshold, allowing the sheer spectacle to wash over me. I needed to calibrate my anger, to let the sight of this obscene display fuel my resolve. My presence was an anomaly, the quiet, dark spot in the bright, self-congratulatory room. My parents were the first to see me. They were holding court near the entrance, greeting guests, looking every bit the proud, successful patriarch and matriarch. Dad's smile froze on his face. Mom's eyes narrowed, a tiny flicker of anxiety crossing her features before she masked it with forced pleasantness. They had expected me to be sullen, to be dressed in a way that screamed struggle. Instead, they saw the sapphire dress, the confident posture, the expensive-looking, though borrowed, jewelry. They saw a threat. Mom rushed over, her arms opening in a gesture of maternal warmth that I knew was pure performance. "Ilara, you actually came!" she exclaimed, her voice pitched too high. She tried to pull me into a hug, but I held my ground, keeping a respectful but rigid distance. The slight rebuff was deliberate. I was not accepting her comfort, nor her control. "Of course I came, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly level, a polite weapon. "It's a huge milestone. I needed to witness the freedom that $300,000 buys." Her eyes darted nervously to the surrounding guests. "Well, yes, dear, but let's keep things light tonight, all right? It's about celebrating Chloe's future, not dwelling on the past. Don't cause a scene. Don't cause a scene." The entire evening was a scene designed to humiliate me, but I was the one who couldn't be dramatic. "I'm not here to cause a scene, Mom," I said, leaning in just slightly so only she could hear. "I'm here to ensure everything is done properly, legally, and fairly." I then excused myself smoothly, leaving her standing there, the smile permanently fixed but the tension tightening around her eyes. Chloe approached next, radiating entitlement. She was wearing a blinding white gown, the perfect visual foil to my dark sapphire. She was holding a martini, already slightly buzzed, and her eyes raked over me, searching for weakness. "Wow, Ilara, you look good," she admitted, the compliment grudging and insincere. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, but carrying just enough to be overheard by a few close friends. "Did you skip a payment this month to afford that dress? You know, the interest on yours is insane. You really shouldn't be so irresponsible." The venom was exactly what I needed. It was a reaffirmation of her utter lack of empathy, her belief in her own superiority. I met her gaze, my expression utterly calm. "No, Chloe," I countered, my voice low and confident. "I'm actually making excellent progress on my debt. But you're right about one thing. I've learned a tremendous amount about finance lately. Specifically, how certain large transactions like a $300,000 payoff can create legal liabilities in other areas of the family portfolio. You wouldn't believe the loopholes." Her triumphant smile instantly dissolved. Her eyes widened, and the color drained from her cheeks. The word liabilities had hit its target. Chloe didn't care about ethics or fairness, but she cared deeply about financial risk and her inherited wealth. "What are you talking about, Ilara? Stop talking nonsense," she hissed, glancing frantically toward our parents. I simply lifted my glass, a small, triumphant gesture. "Oh, no nonsense, Chloe. Just the truth. And the truth, I've found, is always the most valuable currency. Enjoy the party. I have an appointment later." I walked away from her, satisfied. I had successfully injected the poison. I had shattered her complacency and my parents' peace. They were now operating under the pressure of the unknown. They knew I knew something. The game had officially begun. I spent the next hour working the room, greeting family, friends, asking leading questions about family legal matters, and waiting for the designated moment, the start of the speeches. The clink of a spoon against a microphone signaled the beginning of the end. The string quartet faded out, and a hush fell over the lavish ballroom. The lights dimmed, casting a warm, celebratory glow exclusively upon the small, ornate stage where my father took his place behind the podium. My parents and Chloe stood together, a perfect, gleaming tableau of familial success and financial security. I moved from my position near the back wall, gliding closer to the stage, positioning myself where I could see and be seen, but far enough away to still appear an observer. I watched my father straighten his tie, his expression radiating that familiar, maddening blend of pompous pride and self-righteous control. Dad began the speech, his voice amplified, filling every corner of the room. "Friends, family, thank you for being here tonight to celebrate our magnificent daughter, Dr. Chloe, last name. She is a rising star in her field, and now, thanks to her hard work and a little help from her mother and me, she stands before you completely debt-free." He spent the next 5 minutes detailing Chloe's sacrifices that were identical to mine, but which he carefully curated to sound uniquely Herculean. He lauded her excellent judgment in choosing a lucrative specialty. Every word was a thinly veiled compliment to himself, a testament to his wise investment. The whole room felt the warmth of his self-congratulation, a warmth fueled by the cold indifference he had directed at me. He was openly celebrating the $300,000 that bought his favorite daughter freedom, and in doing so, publicly validating my condemnation. "We believe in helping our children achieve their highest potential," he continued, beaming at Chloe. "And sometimes that means clearing the path for the one who is best positioned to run the fastest. The one best positioned." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. It was the sanitized version of, "she deserves it more." It was their official, public justification for their betrayal. My mother took the microphone next, her voice softer, but no less damaging. "We want Chloe to have a flying start. Ilara, you know, she chose a beautiful but difficult path in pediatrics. It's a noble field, but we have to be practical. We support the child who is ready to receive that support. Ready to receive that support." I felt the surge of hot anger rush through my veins. They were telling their friends that I was somehow incapable, not mature enough, that my choice to save children was a lack of practicality worthy of financial exile. I squeezed the edge of my clutch, my knuckles white, reminding myself that the surprise I was about to deliver was worth every second of this excruciating humiliation. Finally, Chloe stepped up to the microphone. She was radiant, her eyes glittering with victory. "I can't thank my parents enough," she gushed. "This gift is life-changing. It means I can truly focus on my career and my future without that terrible burden. It's the ultimate act of belief. Thank you for always knowing what was best for me. She then turned, scanning the crowd, and her eyes, guided by a malicious instinct, found mine. She held the gaze, not with kindness, but with that sickening, triumphant smirk, a clear, silent signal that she knew her victory was my defeat. It was a moment of utter, cruel confirmation. That smirk was the final trigger. The pain, the anger, the calculated planning, it all converged into a single point of cold, unstoppable determination. They had finished their performance. They had told their story. Now, the stage was mine. I adjusted my dress, took a breath that was long and steady despite the adrenaline pumping through my heart, and began to move. I pushed off the pillar, walking with a measured, deliberate pace, straight toward the spotlight. The room, focused on Chloe, didn't notice at first. But my parents saw me. Their eyes went wide with sudden, absolute panic. Chloe's triumphant smile froze on her face. They knew, instantly, that the little doctor they had discarded was no longer going to play the quiet, bitter spectator. I was walking toward the stage, not to congratulate them, but to reclaim the narrative. I didn't rush. I needed the walk to be a statement in itself, calm, confident, and utterly inevitable. The crowd began to stir as they realized the woman in the sapphire dress was heading directly toward the stage, interrupting the family's triumphant moment. By the time I reached the bottom step, the applause for Chloe had withered into confused silence. My father, regaining his composure first, stepped forward, his face a mask of furious control. He blocked my path to the microphone. His smile was gone, replaced by a warning glare. "Alara," he hissed, his voice just low enough not to carry. "What are you doing? Go sit down. You can congratulate your sister later. Do not embarrass us." I met his gaze, my eyes cold, showing him only the face of the lawyer's client, not the face of his daughter. "I'm not here to congratulate, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "I'm here to complete the transaction." I bypassed him, stepping onto the stage and moving directly toward the podium. Chloe made a small, choked sound of protest and lunged forward, but my mother grabbed her arm, holding her back a moment of silent, mutual understanding that they needed to handle this with swift, quiet control. I took the microphone from the stand. The weight of the metallic cylinder in my hand felt heavy, powerful. I looked out over the ballroom, at the hundreds of faces staring up at me, family, friends, colleagues, and extended relatives. I saw confusion, curiosity, and in the faces of my parents, stark terror. I didn't look at my family. I addressed the room directly. My voice, amplified by the sound system, was steady and clear. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Alara. Dr. Alara, last name. Chloe and I are twins. We both graduated from medical school together. We both had successful residencies, and as my family just celebrated, Chloe is now debt-free. It's a truly wonderful gift." I paused, letting the genuine berets, the warmth of the sentiment hang in the air for just a second before I twisted the knife. "But I'm sure many of you are wondering, why only Chloe? Why did my parents, who are celebrating family support tonight, only pay off one daughter's crushing $300,000 student loan?" I'm here to clear up that confusion for everyone. My parents were now flanking me, their faces contorted in silent pleas and furious threats. My father grabbed my arm, hard. "Alara, enough. This is inappropriate. Get off the stage, right now." I smoothly pulled my arm away, ignoring him completely, and raised my voice slightly. My parents explained their decision clearly. They told me I deserved less. My mother's exact words were, "She deserves it more, honey." Because I chose pediatrics, a noble but less lucrative path. They paid off Chloe's debt because, in their words, she was the better investment. A collective gasp swept through the room. The silence was instantly replaced by an aggressive murmur. People were turning, whispering, looking from my shocked parents to me. I had just introduced the ugly truth into their beautiful narrative. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the small, neatly folded, notarized document. I held it up so everyone could see it. "This," I continued, my voice ringing with righteous anger, "is not a petty complaint. This is a legal document proving that their decision was not an act of charity, but an act of calculated self-interest. They paid off Chloe's debt because it was a necessary transaction to facilitate a multi-million-dollar trust restructuring involving commercial property from which I, the disfavored twin, was systematically excluded. I looked directly at my father. His face was a ghastly white. You didn't invest in Chloe, Dad. You invested in a tax loophole. And you sacrificed my future to make the paperwork cleaner. The shock had turned to outright chaos. The crowd wasn't whispering anymore. They were arguing. Guests were pulling out phones, trying to record. My father was roaring, his hands reaching for the microphone cord. My mother was shouting, "Security! Get her off the stage!" But I was faster, fueled by months of banked rage. I clutched the microphone tightly, my voice cutting through the pandemonium. "Wait, I have the specific details right here. This isn't speculation." I quickly unfolded the document. My hands were shaking, but my voice remained steady, a cold drill boring into their carefully constructed reality. The asset in question is the name of commercial property, currently valued at approximately $15 million. Its transfer into the Legacy Trust was executed in late August. According to the original family settlement, all direct descendants were to be treated equally, meaning the $300,000 debt for both children was supposed to be neutralized before the trust was finalized, ensuring equal starting ground. I paused, allowing the weight of the dollar figure $15 million to crush the room's remaining composure. Instead, I continued, leaning into the microphone, my parents intentionally only eliminated Chloe's liability. This not only violates the spirit of the settlement, but my lawyer has confirmed it potentially compromises the validity of the trust's entire tax status, because the prerequisite of equal financial consideration was ignored. This makes their decision not just a moral failing, but a serious legal risk to the entire family estate. My father managed to lunge past me and seize the microphone stand. He yanked the cord, trying to cut me off, but I held the mic piece firmly. "She's lying. This is absurd," he bellowed, his face scarlet, his perfect suit now rumpled. The mask of the successful patriarch had shattered. "Am I, Dad?" I challenged him, my eyes blazing with contempt. "Aunt Carol told me everything. She confirmed that the bank had specifically flagged the trust structure, requiring a clean sheet for the Samide beneficiaries. You didn't pay Chloe's debt because you loved her more. You paid it because she was the key to securing your multi-million-dollar tax avoidance scheme. And my debt, my choice of pediatrics, made the paperwork too messy." Chloe finally broke free from my mother's grip. She screamed, a high-pitched, childish shriek of pure panic. "You witch! You always try to ruin everything. You're jealous. You're just a bitter, poor doctor." I turned to her, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper that was amplified to the entire room. "Poor? I'm carrying $300,000 of debt because our parents valued $15 million over my future. You're not debt-free because you earned it. You're debt-free because you were a convenient pawn in a tax dodge. Enjoy your freedom, Chloe, because the legal and financial ramifications of this trust are now public knowledge, and every single person here who invested with our father is now questioning his integrity." I held the notarized document higher. "My lawyer has been instructed to file a formal request for an equitable distribution of the trust assets based on this clear violation of the original family agreement. This isn't a petty fight anymore. This is a claim on your legacy, built on the foundations of your lie." The roar in the room was deafening now. People were shouting, not just about the scandal, but about their own investments with my father. I had hit the gold standard of revenge, not just emotional pain, but catastrophic financial consequence. My father was scrambling, trying to pull the microphone from my hand, attempting to physically drag me off the stage. But by then, security, or perhaps guests, had intervened, not to remove me, but to separate the chaotic family. The scene was now one of utter public humiliation. I let go of the microphone, allowing him to clutch the dead device. I stepped back, adjusting my sapphire dress, returning to that state of cold, perfect composure. I was done speaking, but my words had detonated a bomb. I looked at Chloe. Her face was no longer that triumphant mask of entitlement. It was crumpled, streaked with tears, and twisted with pure, panicked fury. She hadn't expected a fight. She had expected passive resentment, maybe a few bitter words later. She hadn't expected her sister, the less deserving one, to show up armed with a corporate litigation strategy. The most satisfying part of the entire evening was the moment I looked at her, and she looked back, and her famous, mocking smirk was gone, replaced by genuine, paralyzing fear. "You really thought," I said, my voice quiet now, for my ears only, "that I was just going to sit in the corner and watch you celebrate my suffering? You were so busy congratulating yourself on your freedom that you didn't bother to look at the paperwork. You were just a means to an end, Chloe. And now, you're a liability." My mother was sobbing, clinging to my father's arm, repeating, "It's all ruined, Henry. It's all ruined." Their concern wasn't for me, for Chloe, or even for their marriage. It was for the multi-million-dollar trust, the tax savings, the reputation they had spent a lifetime building. I turned my back on them. I looked out over the stunned crowd. Many guests were avoiding eye contact, ashamed. But a few Aunt Carol was among them were nodding slowly, their expressions grim but approving. They knew the truth, and now the entire room knew it too. I had come to a family celebration to announce that my father was a tax-dodging manipulator, that my sister was a recipient of calculated nepotism, and that their supposed gift of love was a cold, self-serving transaction. The silence that had descended in the immediate aftermath of my speech was profound, the silence of a truth too big, too ugly, and too financially damaging to ignore. I began to walk toward the exit. No one tried to stop me this time. My father was too busy shouting into the dead microphone, demanding that the party continue, demanding that everyone ignore what I had said. But it was over. The atmosphere of celebration had been poisoned beyond recovery. Guests were already making awkward, hasty exits. The champagne tower looked cheap. The string quartet was packing up their instruments. As I reached the door, I paused for one last look. Chloe was on the stage floor, leaning into my mother, her white dress a contrast to her defeat. She was no longer a victor. She was a vulnerable target, her financial fortress built on sand. I didn't feel triumph. Triumph implies clean victory. I felt a cold, weary satisfaction. I had exacted my revenge, but the cost was the final, absolute severing of my family ties. I had traded the possibility of reconciliation for the certainty of justice. And as I stepped out of the shimmering ballroom and back into the dark, silent night, I knew I had made the right choice. The cold night air hit me with a welcome shock. It felt clean, a stark contrast to the stifling, perfume-laced air of the banquet hall. I walked quickly, my sapphire dress flowing around me, the sound of my heels echoing on the marble foyer floor. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could still hear the faint, muffled sounds of shouting from inside the ballroom, my father's roar, my mother's distressed wails, the frantic clamor of a party that had just crashed and burned. As I made it outside to the valet area, I realized my heart was no longer racing. It was beating with a slow, powerful, steady rhythm. The immense pressure that had been crushing my chest for months, the weight of the debt, the psychological burden of the betrayal had finally, gloriously, lifted. The debt was still there, but the shame was gone. The injustice was exposed. I didn't call a taxi. I started walking. I needed the physical exertion, the movement, to process the magnitude of what I had just done. I walked away from the wealth, the privilege, and the toxicity. My phone started vibrating, relentlessly in my clutch. It was Chloe calls, texts, alternating between threats and desperate pleas. "You selfish bee. You just ruined everything. You're going to pay for this, Alara." Asterisk. Followed moments later by, "Alara, please pick up. Dad is having a fit. He's saying you're lying. Please just say it was a misunderstanding. I'll talk to them. I'll try to help you with your payments." The desperate pivot was pathetic. Now that her own gilded security was threatened, she was willing to throw me a bone. But it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the integrity they had forfeited. I deleted her number. I deleted my parents' numbers. I didn't want their explanations, their apologies, or their pathetic attempts at negotiation. I wanted nothing. I wanted the complete and total absence of their toxic presence in my life. I realized, walking down the empty, tree-lined street, that I was finally, truly, free. Not debt-free, that battle was still ahead, but family-free. The chains of conditional love, the obligation to submit to their narrative, the expectation of passive resentment, all of it was severed. The cost was high, the public scene was messy, but the liberation was absolute. I finally pulled out my phone for one specific action. I called my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, who was waiting for my signal. "It's done, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice calm. "The public announcement has been made. I have multiple witnesses, and the entire room heard the confession of financial bias. You can proceed with the filing for equitable distribution of the trust assets immediately. No communication with my parents. Everything goes through your office. Effective now." He paused, then simply said, "Understood, doctor. Last name. I will file first thing tomorrow morning." Hanging up the phone felt like locking a final door. I had moved from being a victim in a painful family dynamic to being a strategic legal opponent. I was no longer fighting for their love. I was fighting for my inheritance, the very asset they had tried to steal from me. I had forced them to acknowledge my worth, not through affection, but through the only language they understood: legal precedent and financial risk. I continued walking until I reached a busy corner where I could flag a cab. My dress was wrinkled, my makeup was slightly smudged from the exertion, but I felt a powerful, visceral sense of vindication. I hadn't succumbed to their cruelty. I had weaponized it. I woke up the next morning feeling utterly hollowed out, yet paradoxically, light. The adrenaline crash was brutal, leaving me exhausted, but the weight of the moral burden was gone. I had the day off from my residency, a cruel twist of fate that ensured I would spend the day dealing with the fallout instead of my patients. The phone started ringing before 7 a.m. It wasn't my family this time, thank God. It was Aunt Carol. "Alara, honey," she whispered, her voice a mix of awe and concern. "The family is in absolute meltdown. Your father is furious. He's calling everyone, saying you're mentally unstable, that you made it all up. But everyone is talking about the trust. Everyone is worried about their own investments." "They're not worried about me," I said flatly, pulling myself into a sitting position. "They're worried about the 15 million. "Exactly," Carol confirmed. "That's why you won. You hit them in their religion. And Chloe, she's hysterical. She understands that the title to her debt-free life has a huge, messy asterisk next to it now. They sacrificed you to secure her future, and now you've destabilized her future to secure your justice." The next call was from my residency director. My heart seized. I thought my father had tried to use his influence to damage my career, but the director's voice was merely cautious. "Doctor, last name, I received a very distressed, very angry call from your mother this morning. She stated you were having a breakdown and need an immediate leave of absence. I just want to confirm, are you well? Is this domestic issue impacting your professional performance?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment they tried to spin the narrative into mental illness. "Thank you for the concern, doctor," I said calmly. "I am perfectly well. My performance is currently excellent. The issue is a long-standing, ugly family dispute regarding financial transparency and inheritance, which has now entered the legal system. My parents are attempting to leverage their influence to discredit me. I can assure you, this has made me more focused, not less. I will continue to perform my duties as required." The director sounded relieved. "Understood, Alara. Thank you for the clarity. You are a valued member of this team. If you need anything from HR, let me know. Do not allow personal matters to compromise your professional life." I hung up, a small, grim smile forming on my lips. They had underestimated me again. I wasn't unstable. I was strategic. I was armed with facts and documentation, not hysteria. Later that morning, Mr. Henderson called. "The petition has been filed, Alara. It's formally initiated. Your parents have been served. We have also issued a statement confirming the validity of your claims regarding the trust's potentially compromised tax status. I expect them to retaliate with extreme prejudice, but the cat is out of the bag." "What's their first move?" I asked, already anticipating the answer. "They'll try to buy you out. They'll offer to pay your $300,000 debt if you drop the claim against the trust." A wave of nausea hit me. $300,000. The freedom I craved. It was right there, an easy escape. I could take the money, pay off my shackles, and walk away clean. It would be easy. But I knew I couldn't. Taking the money now would be accepting their initial premise that I was only worth the debt amount, and that I was willing to be silenced. It would absolve them of the greater crime of emotional and financial betrayal. "Tell them no, Mr. Henderson," I said firmly, the temptation dying instantly. "Tell them I am no longer fighting for the debt. I am fighting for the principle. I want what I was owed from the trust and the assurance of fairness. This is about legal equity now. No settlement until the trust structure is formally corrected." The fight had just escalated. I had just refused my financial freedom in pursuit of true justice. It was a terrifying, exhilarating decision. The next few weeks were a blur of work, legal consultation, and the constant, low-grade hum of war. My parents and Chloe tried every trick in the book to reach me. They used burner phones. They sent emotionally manipulative emails, and they even used old family friends as intermediaries. The content of their messages was predictable. They started with anger, You have destroyed your family. You are a disgrace." They quickly moved to bargaining. "We will pay off your debt, Alara. We will give you $50,000 extra for distress. Just sign a non-disclosure and drop the trust claim." I didn't respond to any of it. Every message went straight to Mr. Henderson's office. I was an emotional fortress, fueled by the memory of my mother's words. "She deserves it more, honey." That phrase was my shield, my motivation, and my moral compass. The most disturbing interaction came from Chloe, who showed up at the hospital one morning. She cornered me in the doctor's lounge, hysterical and makeup-free, looking truly destroyed. "Alara, please," she begged, grabbing my arm. "The trust is being audited. Dad is having heart palpitations. People are pulling their investments. You're destroying our lives." "You mean Dad's elaborate tax structure is being scrutinized?" I asked, my voice calm as I poured myself a cup of coffee. "That's what happens when you prioritize self-interest over family equity." "But I didn't do anything," she wailed. "I just accepted the gift. You're punishing me for their mistake." "You accepted a $300,000 gift that was predicated on my exclusion, Chloe," I countered, looking her straight in her tear-filled eyes. "You enjoyed your freedom while knowing I was drowning. You chose to rub my face in your liberation. You are complicit. And now, you are facing the consequences of our parents' greed and your own complacency." "We're sisters!" "We're twins." "We were," I corrected her, setting down my coffee cup. "The moment Mom told me I deserved less, that bond was severed. You stood by and watched it happen. You benefited from it. Now, you get to live with the fallout. You wanted to be independent? Be independent. Deal with your father's legal mess yourself. Your celebration is over." I walked out of the lounge and straight back to my patients, leaving her sobbing in the sterile quiet. It was the last time I saw her. The encounter was painful, but it cemented my resolve. Her tears were not for me. They were for the loss of her guaranteed financial security. The legal battle dragged on for months. It was costly, stressful, and messy. But the initial shock I had delivered at the party proved to be the decisive blow. My father's reputation was indeed tarnished. The internal pressure from investors and partners who feared the tax audit forced his hand. He needed the matter resolved quietly and quickly before the state fully stepped in. The final settlement came not as a cash gift for the debt, but as a mandatory, legally binding restructuring of the legacy trust. The terms were staggering. The trust was modified to ensure absolutely equal distribution of future earnings and assets to both beneficiaries, meaning my share of the $15 million property's earnings was finally secured. Crucially, as part of the settlement, my parents were legally compelled to pay off my remaining $280,000 of student debt, not as a gift, but as part of the formal equitable distribution, acknowledging it was owed to me as restitution. I won. Not just the money, but the acknowledgement of my worth. The financial liberation was merely the final, necessary clause in a contract of justice. It has been 1 year since the debt-free celebration. My $300,000 debt is gone, paid off, not by a loving gesture, but by a legally mandated settlement signed under duress. The money is just paper, but the principle is everything. I am now officially debt-free and an equal beneficiary of the legacy trust. The irony is delicious. By trying to cut me out of $300,000, they ended up legally securing my access to several million. Their greed was their undoing. I finished my residency and accepted a fantastic, fulfilling position at a children's hospital. I bought a small, beautiful condo, all mine. No roommates, no noisy neighbors, no fighting over the thermostat, just peace. Financial independence bought with my own resilience and a little well-placed, cold-blooded revenge. My relationship with my immediate family is non-existent. I maintain no contact, no calls, no texts, no holiday cards. I moved to a different state for my new job. A final, physical separation. I am a doctor now, focused entirely on my patients and my future. My life is quiet, stable, and truly mine. I heard through Aunt Carol that Chloe and my parents are barely speaking. The stress of the lawsuit and the ensuing legal fees and audits strained their relationship beyond repair. The foundation of their love financial favoritism crumbled when it was tested. Chloe is still debt-free, but her golden pedestal is gone, replaced by the reality that she is forever tied to a compromised, high-risk trust structure. She has to live with the knowledge that her success came at the expense of her sister's emotional well-being and her parents' integrity. She has to live with the truth. As for me, I have traded a toxic family for peace. That is the greatest reward of all. I look back at the young woman sitting at that dinner table, watching her folder not appear, hearing those cruel words, "She deserves it more, honey," and I feel a profound sense of closure. I proved them wrong. I figured it out. I was more than resilient. I was the one who had the strength to reject their conditional love and fight for my absolute worth. They didn't get to break me. They just made me stronger, colder, and infinitely more strategic. They thought they had saved their favorite daughter, but they only succeeded in creating the monster that finally held them accountable. My life is finally just mine. I carry no debt, no obligation, and no guilt. The $300,000 chains are broken, and the truth is, I wouldn't change a single moment of the struggle, because without their betrayal, I never would have found the strength to save myself. This is the ultimate freedom. If you've heard a story like this, or if you've had to fight for what you deserved, make sure you like this video, subscribe for more true stories of triumph over betrayal, and comment below with where you are watching from. Your fight is real, and sometimes, justice is the only debt worth collecting.